Everyone, and welcome back to our Global to Local Speaker Series. And I want to thank you all for being here on this hectic week since the last week of classes. And as a reminder, this event is being recorded and will be uploaded on YouTube soon after. We also have a feedback form that should be sent after the event, and we would love to hear your suggestions and thoughts. Joining us today, we have Nicole, a doctoral student in the social welfare and PhD program. She's currently 3 years in, where a lot of her work centers around community work in criminal justice and food justice. Some of her work includes storytelling as a means of social change and effect on the criminal justice system on the community. She's also an organizer with the WNY chapter of the Campaign for Alternatives to Isolated Confinement and continuously involved with macro social work group here at UP. A fun fact about Nicole is that she makes a podcast with her 13-year-old nephew, and I am really happy to present her for presenting this week.
All right. Welcome, everybody. For those of you that I don't know, once again, my name is Nicole Capizzello, and thank you so much for joining me for my presentation, Moving Beyond Concrete and Steel, How Nature Can Facilitate Healing and Connection in the Criminal and Justice System. So just an outline of what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to go over my background, hopefully not too at length for you, and then go into solitary confinement, which is a lot of the work I've done has been around that. Specifically the design of solitary confinement and architecture around that, problems posed by it, and then we'll end with some solutions and a question and answer session. For everyone joining us online, feel free to put any kind of questions in the chat as we go. If it makes sense for me to answer them as we go and someone can flag me, I will answer them as we go, but if not, I'll make sure to try to answer them at the end. All right, so as was just mentioned, I'm a current PhD student here in social welfare, and my research revolves around how we use nature and design and design and interventions to help individuals in the criminal justice system. That's what I'm going to be talking about today. On the side, I'm also a freelance writer, and I'm a coordinator with the Grassroots Garden of Western New York Therapeutic Gardening Task Force, and I'm also a member of several organizations that Risha mentioned. So I'm an advocate, organizer, and educator with Social Workers and Allies Against Solitary Confinement, which is a national organization, and I also work with the Western New York chapter of the statewide organization, the Campaign for Alternatives to Isolated Confinement. All right, so how did I get interested in criminal justice stuff? This is something that I have wondered a lot. And the best I can really do is that when I was 12 years old, I went to the public library in the small town I was growing up in and got the book Dead Man Walking. I'm not sure if a kind librarian recommended it or if I chose it myself, but I ended up reading that book by Sister Helen Prejean. And it just really stuck with me. And like I said, I'm not really sure why. I was a middle-class white kid growing up in Wisconsin. I didn't know anyone involved in the criminal justice system in any way. I didn't have any like lawyers in my family. I didn't know anyone who was a corrections officer. I definitely didn't know anyone who was incarcerated. But yet there I was in the early stages of the internet, looking at pictures of people on death row around the country, reading these like profiles and stories and feeling like really affected as a 12-year-old. And I don't really, at the time I didn't have the language to describe really what I was feeling, but I think what I was really reacting to was this idea that we should be having a justice system that thought of people in just these punitive terms, right? And punish as the main way of dealing with a wrong that had been committed. And I now understand that like really what I was kind of connecting to is the idea of restorative justice. And of course didn't have the language for that at the time either. But the idea that people in prison deserved basic human rights, that they were capable of healing was never something I had to be convinced of, even just as a kid, right? And I just didn't understand why we'd be doing something that wasn't working. And that is still how I generally feel today, and I'm sure what motivates a lot of you in your work as well. So this is a quote that I love. It's sometimes attributed to Brian Stevenson. I'm fine with it either way, but people are more than the worst thing they've ever done. All right, so fast forward a little bit to my 20s. I was living in Seattle at the time. I read an article about alternative justice programs around the country, some in prisons and some outside. And I read about an organization called Books to Prisoners, which was in Seattle where I was living, right? And I started volunteering there and I totally loved it. So I used to go On weeknights, I would try to just go for like an hour or two, but I'd usually end up staying till they closed at 10 p.m. And what I would do is I would open books like anyone else did, or sorry, open letters like anyone else did there. And then I would search for the book requests that people had. Usually we didn't have what they wanted. A lot of times they ironically wanted like true crime stuff. Sometimes people wanted like history. A lot of people wanted dictionaries. We had one really wonderful time where a guy wanted books on fixing late 60s Chevrolets. And then I went to our car shelf, which had 3 books on it, and 2 of them were about 1967 to 1970 Chevrolets.
Oh, great.
And I wrote him and told him like he was the luckiest man on earth that day, because normally we didn't have what people wanted, much less something that specific. So hopefully he's fixing cars wherever he is. But I loved doing that work, and it was a good kind of experience for me to start getting more connected with people involved in the criminal justice system. And I'm still kind of figuring out where my interests and passions were at that point. But I remember distinctively one day where I was opening a letter, and it started off, as many of them do, thanking us for the service and how important these books were to them. And let me just pause quick. Are there any like things in the chat that people can't hear me or anything?
No.
Okay, everything's good. I'm not just speaking to no one. Okay. Great. So I distinctly remember this one day where I opened a letter and this person said, thank you so much for the service. Thank you so much for these books. I really appreciate them. This is especially important to me because I'm in solitary confinement. And I turned to the woman working at the time and I said, oh my God, this guy's in solitary confinement. And she just looked at me and said, yeah, a lot of people are in solitary. And I had no idea, right? You don't know what you don't know. And I had been reading about the criminal justice system all the time for a long time. I've watched all these documentaries. I had known people who had been involved in various ways. I've been volunteering with this organization, and yet I had no idea about solitary confinement at all. And I want you guys just to think, wherever you may be in your lives or in the world right now, but I'm guessing you've watched films, listened to true crime podcasts, watched shows like Law and Order. How often does solitary confinement come up? Have you ever seen it portrayed?
I saw it portrayed yesterday.
Did you? Where? Why?
I was watching the movie on Brian Banks. And he ends up in solitary confinement after just defending himself from being raped.
When was the movie made?
Michelle, do you know? Oh my goodness, I don't remember right off. A few years ago.
Interesting.
Yeah.
2018.
So I watch for it now, like just to see, and it was shown in When They See Us, the Ava DuVernay,
Yeah.
really, really powerful and upsetting series. It is in there. And my sister sent me a clip from Law and Order SVU that like really does go over the facts really well. But for the most part, like this is not something that we talk about. It's something that's happening in almost every prison and jail in the country. And that most people that you talk to who have been incarcerated will experience at least for a brief amount of time. But it's very much occurs in the shadows, which of course is by design. Okay. So what is solitary confinement? Just to start off, it's the practice of isolating people in closed cells for 22 to 24 hours a day without meaningful human contact for periods of days, months, years, or decades. So powerful shots from the article that Guardian did, the solitary confinement cell from above. All right, so few prisons use the term solitary confinement. They'll usually call it like a special housing unit or SHU or segregation or restrictive housing, okay? And there's also different kind of classifications of solitary confinement. So there's what's called disciplinary segregation, which is for people who violate prison rules. So that can be really big, like an assault or something, or it can be something really minor, like having to meet bed sheets. And then you can also have what's called administrative segregation, and that is based on how a person is classified, and that might be somebody who's considered a political prisoner, or somebody who's considered an escape risk, or somebody with gang affiliations. That's a really common one, especially in California. So those people wind up in solitary for often indefinite amounts of time. So those are the people that can sometimes be in there for decades, right? And then finally, there's what's called involuntary protected custody. And that is when people are put in solitary like for their own good. So specifically vulnerable populations such as LGBTQ individuals or children being held in adult facilities. Okay. So this is by no means a rare occurrence. Right now there are 80,000 people in solitary confinement in the United States. Unfortunately, that figure has stayed about the same since I started really getting into this almost 10 years ago. And some facts about solitary. So anything over 15 days is considered torture by the United Nations. So those what's called the Mandela rules. Nelson Mandela was famously subjected to solitary confinement. And this is just, I want it to be clear, this is not just an unpleasant experience, but this is a human rights violation we are doing in this country every day. And no judge or jury sentences someone to solitary confinement. So it's a punishment carried out within a prison, and thus it only ends within the prison because people there decide to stop it. So when you're in solitary, you're in a very powerless position. And like our prison system in general, people of color are disproportionately represented in solitary units. So there's a couple of research examples on this, but a 2015 Yale Law School study found that nationally, Black males make up 40% of the prison population, but 45% of the restricted housing population. And then in New York City, where there has been a little bit more work on this, 50,000 first-time jail admissions showed that Black people were 2.5 times more likely to be put solitary than white people. And we're going to watch a very short video, and it's an immersive sort of experience, about 2.5 minutes long. They recommend that you put headphones on if you're at home, so if you want to do that, you're welcome to. If you think this could be triggering for you in any way, it is pretty dark, so I would say just mute it if it's not something that you want to experience right now.
Welcome to your cell. You're going to be here for 23 hours a day.
You can be sent to solitary for
More than 6.2. Yelling too loud.
any kind of drugs.
Having too many rolls of toilet paper is 90 days extra.
Not eating all of your food.
It is uncommon for somebody such as to hear that it took 500-600 years in a book.
After a while, things start to slip.
I find myself floating.
As a psychologist, I can tell you that you are going to undergo many different kinds of reactions, and some of them will be more immediate than others.
You know, you see like the paint on the wall, it's that paint probably been there maybe 50 years before I got there. So you start seeing figurines.
The toilet that drips because it sweats and it hits the floor.
People turn on themselves.
They want to treat us like animals. We might as well act like animals.
There are high rates of suicide and self-harm.
People understand is violence. All we understand is the violent reaction. Diplomacy with this institution.
There are physical and physiological consequences of being deprived of human social contact, so that people's brainwave patterns are altered, and certainly people who are in these environments for many months or years on end have to change and transform who they are, and so they're damaged.
Just an aside, I read recently that someone who does, a psychologist work on solitary, said that they were comparing how people's brains in solitary are changed to people who experience extreme isolation on like the Antarctic tundra, because it's similar, it's like deprivation. So, really interesting that you can see this on that level. So, so like I said, I didn't know how much people knew about solitary, and I thought it would be an important thing to kind of give you an experience of what this is like, especially since we're going to talk about how the physical design of spaces can really influence people and healing. So what stuck out to you about this, I guess I'm curious about, and that can go for the people in this room if they would like to contribute, and then anybody online that'd like to put something in the chat, Michelle or somebody else can read it off if you want to share what stuck out to you, or if you ever have been to a prison before or have any direct experience with this, how it felt and what you maybe remember about the physical design of the space that you were in. Anybody have anything they'd like to share?
I think the look of the cell and how it just reeks of dehumanization. You know, I mean, the high ceiling and the metal toilet, and then there's the cot. And that's it. And the concrete walls. You know, and I mean, I was in jail for 3 days once in my own cell, you know, in Washington, DC. And I remember when that door shut. But we were on a honeymoon, really. And just trying to imagine what it would have been like if I was in that cell for 20 years, you know, because people are some in solitary confinement for so many years, many of them. And that would have just been, yeah, unbearable.
Yeah, Havis is also talking about the sounds and smallness of the space. Jared about the dehumanizing aspects, cold, sterile, and dehumanizing. Shahanda, especially evident in the CAIC simulated cell. No separation for various activities. Bathroom, sleeping is all in the same space. Extreme claustrophobia. Yeah. Nice, cold, sterile.
The sound is really striking. I've seen a few documentaries where that's like really what has stood out to me too. Any other thoughts or reactions?
Well, my mind went all over the place, probably because I had just seen the movie yesterday afternoon, which shows the guy in solitary confinement and all the places his mind goes, and you really see what's happening to him. So that kind of echoed for me. I do mitigation work for guys on death row. So I've spent a fair amount of time in prisons like San Quentin, but my mind didn't actually go there. My mind went to two other places. One, the fact that IFSW, the International Federation of Social Workers, specifically talks about the responsibility of social workers and how we should not be involved with anything that can torture somebody's mind. NASW just doesn't even go there, but IFSW does. And then my mind just kind of landed on my friend Santiago. Some of you know Santiago Masferrer. He's got the business down on Elmwood, and he spent a lot of time in prison under the Pinochet dictatorship for recycling and trying to organize people. And you had said earlier that being a political prisoner is a risk for solitary confinement. So that's probably what led me there, realizing that somebody that I know personally and care about deeply here in our community has been exposed to things like that for a significant amount of time. I was all over the place, but thank you for presenting this to us, and particularly for the beginning. So I felt like I could protect myself by putting both feet on the ground, literally, grounding myself so that I would be okay looking at this.
Yeah, I think part of the reason that solitary really took root with me as an issue is because I am somebody who values connection so much, and I really don't think I can survive it. And I have to remind myself when I'm immersing myself in things like this, that this is something that people are surviving right now for much longer than this, but it's still really difficult to even think about. So earlier this year, I went to Attica Correctional Facility a couple times to visit someone there. The design of that is very interesting in that it looks like a castle, it's like fortress kind of look. into it. But even though I was visiting someone who's in solitary there, I've never seen what the solitary cells look like there. So this quote comes from David Cloud, who's a public policy person, but also a lawyer, and he used to work with the Barry Institute of Justice. And he says, I've been in prisons and jails all over the country, New Mexico, Nebraska, Oregon, North Dakota, Georgia, Louisiana, among others, and their solitary units all look rather different. There are some architectural commonalities, but the level of noise, how deep it is in the prison, the temperature, the cleanliness, the technology, all greatly varies. But the thing they share, whether it's a newer Supermax or a more cheaply built solitary unit, is that it's a place that's meant to isolate, deprive, and dehumanize people. I don't know if I had used the term dehumanize yet in the presentation, but that is what a lot of people picked up on, all right? And just also as a point of clarification, this comes from, a lot of the stuff I'm presenting today comes from an article I wrote for the website Solitary Watch. So like I said, I'm a freelance writer on the side, and I got to write an article where I interviewed a lot of architects and designers around this. And as Dr. Weaver just mentioned, there are different professional organizations that see themselves as having a role specifically around solitary confinement and torture and coming out against that. Unfortunately, the NASW is not one of them, though the American Association of Social, or sorry, the architects, AIA, forgetting the American Institute of Architects, it's like their largest professional organization, had amended their code of ethics that architects can no longer help design places of torture. So that would be solitary confinement cells and execution chambers.
Wow.
So this was huge. This happened in December of last year.
Yeah.
But this article I wrote is talking about kind of larger justice initiatives around that. And unfortunately, the NASW, despite pressure from organizations, has not ever come out to say anything.
And they have had pressure.
Yeah, because the work, I work with the social workers and allies against solitary confinement, and a lot of what they've tried to do is talk about that. I'm sure other organizations have as well. And as you guys also probably know, there's a really interesting kind of literature review of the code of ethics, and I get really nerdy about the code of ethics of different countries where social work is a big profession. And I think of the 21 that they talk about, a lot of them are in Western Europe. It's also like the Pacific Islands, right? The majority of them mention human rights explicitly in their code of ethics. Ours does not.
Yeah, right.
So that has given us less to kind of stand on when we tried to say, well, shouldn't social workers not be involved in this? Because there's nothing in there that says anything about human rights. It uses other words, but it doesn't use the term human rights. So highly disappointing, but hopefully motivating as well. All right, so like David said, there aren't like not all solitaries gonna look the same, but it's gonna be generally have some commonalities. These are some common design features. It's gonna usually be a 6 by 9 foot space. There's often no windows, and the window is often frosted over if there is one, just to kind of disorient you as much as possible. As you saw, oftentimes there's a bathroom in there, and that toilet is going to be made out of like destruction-proof materials, such as steel. You have poured reinforced concrete, so if people do have self-harm, they're not damaging the property as well. Some cells have showers within them, but a lot of times people also escorted to the shower in shackles, like once or twice a week. Some cells have bars, but usually they just have solid metal doors, okay? And there's also something to think about as social workers is how this next part is done. So as you kind of saw in that video, you have a slot in the door, and that slot is how people receive their meals. It's how they get handcuffed and shackled before and after they leave the cell. And then it's also where most communication is done with behavioral health and medical professionals. So I've talked to people in solitary who had something wrong with their foot, where the doctor looked at it through the slot. Or they talk to their counselor for their weekly appointment through that door, where you can hear all the other cacophony going on, right? So that's not only not a comfortable way to do this, but it also is not showing any sort of confidentiality, right? So by social workers being involved in this, we're perpetuating the lack of ethics.
Can I ask you just quickly, Nicole, when you went to visit the person at Attica, where did you visit with them?
Yeah, so when I went to Attica and to visit the person there was like the solitary unit has its own like visiting space. So he was brought in. So it wasn't like in the movies where you see someone in like a cafeteria area or anything. And he was brought in and put in like a cage. And kind of mockingly, they had signs up that said no embracing. I was like, how could anybody embrace? He's like, I could like, because I could pass him food through a slot like underneath it, but he's gotten moved since then to mid-state. And he said there that's even worse and that they make them stay shackled for their entire visit.
Oh my God.
Yeah, do you have a question?
I was just gonna share a comment on the chat in this topic, and this is Attica, SHU is brutal, and there are arm shackles in the visiting area for the incarcerated folks in the visiting area.
Yeah, but he did not have to be shackled when I was there.
Okay.
But it was probably the same as when they built it however long ago. And the only sort of like modern update was like a camera watching me. And even there you have like a window that's like tinted so you can't see what's going on inside, right? Because you wouldn't want people to accidentally absorb anything of hope. Then, as you saw, sound tends to be echoey, disorienting in these places. There's very poor temperature regulation. So the entire Texas state correction system, there's no air conditioning. So imagine being in Texas in the summer in a closed cell like that with no air conditioning and no fan. And then smells also linger due to poor air circulation and ventilation. All right, and so this is the outside of a Supermax facility. This is Florence, which was built, it's a federal facility. It was the first one built to be all solitary. And this is in the middle of nowhere in the desert, as you see in Colorado. And that's what the cells look like there. Something I found especially horrifying when I started learning about this is that when people get their 1 hour of rec time, supposedly per day, but hopefully at least 5 times a week. So they have this out of cell time. This is where they're taken to. If you're lucky, you're taken to a cage like this. Sometimes the sides are even opaque. So all you're gonna see of nature would be the sky above you. So you're not going out to a yard or getting to walk around anyway. You're being taken to another cell. This is a quote from Herman Wallace, who's one of the Angola 3, who's a political prisoner that was in solitary confinement for I believe 41 years there. And he said, in society, they have learned that animals being in a closed area is inhumane, but they treat human beings here in a worse way. They put people here in a 6x9 cell. They are not going to put animals in a cage like that unless they are doing some experiment with the animals and trying to kill them. This is what they are doing to these men. They are killing them slowly and surely. All right, so there are a lot of issues with solitary, as you can imagine. Prisons use it still because they say it's a necessary management tool, despite the fact that most other countries don't need this necessary management tool. And one of the big problems with this, of course, is that 95% of people who are currently incarcerated are going to be released. So this is doing damage to them in addition to their families, to their communities, and to the society to which they're being released. And as you saw in that short video, there are a lot of physical and psychological damages. Self-harm and suicide are much more common in solitary than in the general population. It's very easy to see why. It's also really expensive. So it's estimated that at Florence, the one I just showed you in Colorado, it costs $70,000 a year to incarcerate someone because of the high level of technology and building costs of such a place. Of course, this leads to relational issues. If people who spend time in solitary have trouble relating to people afterward. And it also has a negative impact on prison culture. So corrections officers who work in solitary units generally are very stressed out. It's a very difficult job for them. And they usually don't have positive interactions with the other people there. So states that have successfully ended solitary have shown much fewer incidents of disciplinary issues. So it's another thing just to think about. All right, so just a reminder to me, take a deep breath because all of this is very heavy. So I have been working on solitary confinement issues here in New York State for almost 3 years, which is not even nearly as long as many people who've been doing this work. And it is just it's very difficult because, I work with people. For me, this is something that I feel passionately about, but I'm very lucky in that I have not directly experienced it, but I work with people who have, right? So I work with people who are solitary confinement survivors. I work with people whose children died in solitary. I work with people who have loved ones still in solitary. They feel powerless to help. And then, I also correspond with people in solitary confinement too, right? So it's all heavy, but at the same time, I find this to be a very hopeful issue in some ways. That's because I really think that even if you don't know the research or you have varied opinions on the criminal justice system or policing, whatever you have, the idea that this is inhumane is not very hard for most people to get to. So if you watch something like that or you describe to somebody what solitary confinement is, or they hear from somebody who experienced it, it's not that hard for them to understand that this is wrong and that we shouldn't be doing it. And that this is a very extreme example of many of the issues within our criminal justice system. And I love this quote by Desmond Tutu. "A person is a person through other persons. None of us comes into the world fully formed. We would not know how to think or walk or speak or behave as human beings unless we learned it from other human beings. We need other human beings in order to be human. I am because other people are." The other great thing about this work is that this year we actually passed some pretty meaningful solitary confinement legislation here in New York State. So the organization that I work with here got our bill that we've been working on for, I think, 9 years, finally signed by, at the time, aggrieved Governor Cuomo, and so he signed it, and that means by March of next year, this will have to be implemented. And it is considered the strongest anti-solitary legislation in the country. And what it's going to do is end the torture of solitary confinement so people can never be in solitary for more than 15 days. And then the big part is create more humane and effective alternatives for people. So a lot more programming and therapy, and at least 7 hours per day of out of cell time. And then drastically restrict the criteria that would even land somebody in solitary, ban solitary for particular groups. And then finally, train staff to make this more of an effective rehabilitative program as opposed to just punishment.
Who's responsible for administrating that and making sure that it happens?
Yeah, so the Department of Corrections is who's supposed to be implementing it, but then they're working with us. And that's another thing, is like some countries have, people can hear Diane asked who's responsible for administering it. Some countries have like oversight committees.
Yeah.
We don't have anything that's strong here, so that's something we're looking at introducing as well, because I think that would really strengthen any reform that we would succeed.
Yeah.
All right, so I really believe, and I'm sure a lot of you do here, that we, no system or anything exists without a human being having made it, right? So anything that we see around us is created because we want it to be that way. So we design systems, interventions, policies that reflect our values. And Michelle Alexander asks, the question is, do we want to create and maintain sites that are designed for the intentional infliction of needless suffering? Because that's what prison is today. They are sites where we treat people as less than human and put them in literal cages and intentionally inflict harm and suffering on them, and then expect this will somehow improve them. It's nonsensical, immoral, and counterproductive, and that is what I would like to see come to an end. All right, so I think a big part of this is moving from this models I talked about of retribution towards restorative justice, and hopefully a lot of people already know what restorative justice is, but just very basically, in case you don't, it consists of inclusion of all parties, including the party that was harmed, encountering the other side, making amends for that harm, and then reintegration of the parties into the community. So this looks very different from how we think of things and how we do things in our current justice system, but it's much older than how we do things in our current justice system. And I think that nature has a huge role to also play in this, and that's what a lot of my work revolves around. So, as you all probably know from your own just life experience, being in nature makes people in general less stressed out. It has physical, psychological effects. You can see that through research with just passive access to nature, whether that's like the view of nature through a window or housing projects where people have had community gardens in their space, and those that don't, you can see both psychological and physiological reactions to that. And then there's more targeted interventions, which include therapeutic gardening, and that's a lot of what I do here. So looking at interventions that use like nature and plant-based activities specifically with people in prison, but it's also been done with a lot of other different groups, people with mental illness, survivors of IPV, youth with behavioral problems, Alzheimer's patients, a lot of geriatric patients in general. And in general, when people are engaging with plants and with nature, it's been shown to decrease stress, depression, social isolation. And I think that prison and solitary confinement fits into this because it's just such the opposite end of that, right? So what do we need to do? This is just coming like from my own brain, but what I think we need to do is believe in the inalienability of human rights, regardless of an individual's past actions. Believe in the humanity of every person and the ability of all of us to apologize, to forgive, to grow and to heal. And then we, very importantly, need to create policies that reflect those beliefs. We need to implement interventions that reflect those beliefs. And then what I'm going to talk about today a little bit more is build physical spaces in and outside of our traditional justice system that reflect this as well. So this is Deanna Van Buren, who is the founder of Designing Justice, Designing Spaces, which is an organization I talked to when I was writing that article. She's also an architect, and she says, we didn't used to have prisons. These are relatively new building types if you look at the history of humanity, and they're not effective, and we can do something different. So we're going to talk about some of the many different things that are happening today. This is Mass Design Group, another nonprofit architecture firm out of Boston, and they worked with the Equal Justice Initiative. Anyone been here to this?
No, but I'm familiar with them.
Yeah, I really would love to go to this, but I haven't been able to go yet. But this is in Montgomery, Alabama, Brian Stevens' organization, the EJI, and they worked on the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. That's the building you're seeing off to the right. And then up on the left is a part of that, which is their lynching memorial, and that has soil samples from all the different identified lynching sites around the United States. All right, this is Designing Justice, Designing Spaces work with the Atlanta City Detention Center, and there it is up top. And it's right in downtown Atlanta, and it currently is housing, it's still open, but has very few people compared to how many it was meant to house. And there's been thoughts of how can we either repurpose this space or entirely remove it and make it into something else. So their organization has been working with communities. That's the picture you see in the upper right. A big part of their process is to go in and do these like community engagement sort of forums where they talk to people who've been directly impacted, as well as community members in the area and then policymakers to all do these kind of like design workshops together. And down at the bottom is one of their ideas that they've had for this Center for Equity, which is still in progress. And this is another one that's very interesting to me. So this is Camp J, which is the solitary unit down at Angola prison. And it was the site of torture of many people over many years. And it was finally closed in 2017. And Mass Design worked with the Vera Institute on thinking of ideas of how this space could be redone. And some people think that maybe they could still use the space, but try to make it into like a different like housing model or like used for education. Other people who had been incarcerated there said it just needs to be gone entirely. So what you see on the right is a sanctuary space. They call it a center of interpretive ruin that they would potentially put in its place. That would of course include gardens and nature. All right, this is here locally. This is a garden outside of the Erie County Youth Detention Center that I helped put in last year now. So this is a grant-funded project by the Grassroots Garden in Western New York organization that I work with. And they have a vegetable garden inside for youth there, which is really cool. And then on the outside, they now have this garden, so people who are visiting loved ones can experience that too. This is the greenhouse program at Rikers Island. We don't have a lot of positive associations with Rikers, understandably so, but they do have this very long running horticultural therapy programs. They have trained horticultural therapists through the New York Botanical Garden who've been coming in since the late 90s now, doing these programs with people. I thought that's the Diana Elsie of the New York Botanical Garden there.
Like, which people do they do it with? You know what I mean? It's like Rikers. It's like,
And there's, yeah, it's like I don't know, so many people there too.
Yeah.
All right. And this is the Oregon State Penitentiary Memorial Healing Garden. This was a collaboration with the Asian American Pacific Islander Family Club there in that prison, and then a local Japanese architect of Oregon who designed this space. And it was completed in 2019. The guy you're seeing there is named Johnny Coffer, and he has been in prison for, I believe, 26 years, and it's a long sentence to go still, and said that the day the trees came in, it was the first time he'd seen a tree in 20 years.
wow.
So it's a very emotional day. All right, then we're going to end with talking about my favorite project of all, which is something called the Solitary Gardens Project. And then after that, I'll have a little bit of time for questions. This is 8 minutes long.
I spent 12 years working with Herman Wallace on a project called The House That Herman Built, where in collaboration, this man who spent 41 years in solitary confinement and myself designed a dream home with the intention of building it. when I asked him what kind of house does a man who's spent 30 and then 41 years in solitary confinement dream of, and the first thing he asked for were gardens. Herman's history is very complex. He was wrongfully convicted Black Panther political prisoner who spent 4 decades in solitary. He was released from prison and died 3 days later. And so in a lot of ways, to continue Herman's legacy, I need to grow things, hope and possibility and promise. That's the birth of this project. How you doing? Hello. How was that bus ride?
I'm coming. This is y'all feel experience.
What's this? What does it look like? If you stand back, what does this look like?
A prison cell.
Oh, yeah. These garden beds are the same size and blueprint as traditional solitary cells. This is the desk. This would be the bed where these guys are standing. Right back here is the toilet. So sometimes folks are kept in solitary confinement in a cell that's this big for, how old are you guys?
11.
So sometimes they're kept in these cells for 9, 10, 11, 12, 14 years. This project requires us to write, to have these written exchanges with folks who are in solitary confinement, who designed this garden bed. And you can see he's got 3 different kinds of plants in his garden bed. And so the only place that we can grow plants is where the human being can move, because the bed, the desk, the table, the toilet are all cemented into the walls. It's in the back of the toilet.
They treat human beings like that? What do they drink?
It's a terrible idea. They treat human beings like that.
What do they drink?
And the idea that there's like 80,000 to 100,000 men, women, and children who are kept in indefinite solitary confinement in the colonized United States, which means a minimum of 23 hours a day, you're in a cage. It's crazy. It's a crazy notion of justice.
Solitary confinement seems to be the most extreme form of punishment within an already extremely punitive system. Like, no judge or jury assigns someone to solitary confinement. It's completely at the discretion of prison officials. So people are getting put in solitary because they're pregnant, or they're queer, or they're the youngest person in the population, or they have a disability and they're not fitting in with the rest of the population. It's otherizing within a system that's already like for the other in society.
Be able to share that with as many people as possible is really the intention of the Solitary Gardens. And so I'm going to be driving the garden beds around and setting them up with volunteer and host institutions with this prison abolitionist vehicle called the Garrison. Garrison is a nod to the great abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison. Word garrison is also a verb, which means to station troops. Some ways we're like nodding to this abolitionist history, but then also stationing ideas. We're stationing like possibility. We're in these spaces that are deeply and directly affected by mass incarceration to provide an alternative.
Living in Louisiana, living in New Orleans, you really see how incarceration touches every piece and person in society. And the state incarcerates more people per capita than any other state or country on the entire planet.
We build this prison cell turned garden bed. We're building it out of the byproducts of sugarcane, cotton, tobacco, and indigo, the largest chattel slave crops.
With this project, they're seeing the connection and understanding what the means of cotton, indigo, and sugar mean to us, particularly as Black people. Understanding, what this stuff really looks like and feels like, and the tangible evidence of it.
And so it's been this process, which is also transformative, of taking and literally growing these plants on site and then grinding them down and adding them to this aggregate and then building these garden beds together. And my intention is to, it's poetic, right? It's to illustrate the evolution of chattel slavery into mass incarceration. And within that is that story, which, you know, sometimes if you're too didactic, people don't want to even talk about it. But I think as an artist, you have a responsibility to like seduce and destroy. Once the garden bed is built, we will grow food and flowers and plants that somebody who's in solitary confinement is asking us to grow for them. And then what happens is those host institutions will be in correspondence with a solitary gardener, either someone they already knew or someone we pair them with. And so they will, for the course of at least 2 growing seasons, be growing whatever plants those gardeners want. The solitary gardens, in a lot of ways, become portraits of those who are buried furthest within our carceral institutions, right? Those that we are told to most forget are then most remembered and brought to the surface and brought to public arenas.
Honeysuckle was along the fence where I used to catch the school bus at. It provided a sweet smell for me to begin my day with. Sometimes we'd pluck the flowers and suck the honey out. Sunflowers grew in the field behind the house I grew up. We would catch grasshoppers on them so we could go fishing with them. That was a favorite pastime of mine as a kid. Marigold reminds me to go to the sun, how it shines bright every day, somewhere, whether we see it or not. Having been locked up so long, I often drift over the wires with my thoughts to visit better days. Summers are times we plant our own watermelon and cantaloupe from the seeds, from the fruit itself. It was a sense of accomplishment and a sweet treat. All the best, Dennis.
So that is all I have for everybody. And then another quote from Desmond Tutu. But thank you guys all for joining me. If we want to talk about reactions to the video, any questions you may have had or anything else, I'm happy to do that. Yeah, and I hope that you enjoyed learning about this and hopefully feel inspired and motivated and will notice more kind of the design in our world around us, how that, you know, reflects our values and what could be.
This was really powerful. I appreciate this. I wonder if you could speak a little more specifically to the role of social workers.
I thought about including that, but I figured someone would ask.
And maybe about the work that you do in your organization that you're a part of.
Yeah, so I think that social workers, of course, could be involved in this more than they are, right? So what the research around like nature interventions in prison or prison design in general is very cross-disciplinary. So I read articles and talk with people who are artists like Jack Snell, or who are nurses or occupational therapists or lawyers or urban planners or architects. I loved all the architects I got to talk to because they're people whose job is to build something out of nothing. And unlike social workers, are not, sometimes like depending who they are, right? Depending the kind of personality that attracts, but like maybe aren't as tired or as accepting of having to work within systems as a lot of social workers are, because a lot of our job often is meeting people where they are in these systems that are not working, right? So it's fun to talk to people who are just really like visionary thinkers. But I think that social workers have a huge role to play in this space, because when I like talk to urban planners, like they're not thinking about things at the level necessary. We don't have the training of the micro, meso, macro that is inherent to social work. And I also think that, like I already said, social workers are already embedded in these institutions. There are social workers already within the criminal justice system doing lots of different roles. And I think this shows that it's important to have social workers engaged in changing policy, of course. So, and also have social workers to be looking at things like our code of ethics to see whether it reflects our profession in the way that we want it to. And even if you're not somebody working directly with someone in solitary confinement, that's still something that you can care about and fight for. So that's all I really have on how this pertains to social workers. But if other people have ideas of how they think that social workers should or could be involved in this space.
See, I think we have a dilemma. You know, and I know we've talked about it some within the school, but we haven't resolved it. In that, you know, when social workers are embedded in criminal and justice systems, are we enabling the system to continue?
That is totally a dilemma, yeah.
Because actually, and yet people in those systems need services, you know, like they need mental health services, for example. You know, and that may be the difference between life or death, potentially. But social workers in that system, I haven't heard of a situation where social workers within such a system have been able to transform the system, that they're at the bottom of the power hierarchy, you know. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's a dilemma, and I certainly don't have an answer to it. And I just want to say that that video was really powerful, and I loved when she said, you know, where it was like we're taking those who are supposed to be most invisible, and we're, yeah, I mean, I'm paraphrasing her, I forget what it's that word, but we're lifting them up. We're making them visible, you know. I mean, the inhumanity of that solitary system. Yeah, so I don't know. So I think we have a dilemma in social work.
Yeah, so the organization I work with, Social Workers Against Solitary Confinement, grapples with that too.
Yeah.
And we kind of try to do both. And that there's some people who are members of the organization who still somehow work in corrections and see it as important for them to be doing the work they are. And then there are a lot of people who left and saw that their change, they were never going to like be able to both personally handle it or institute the level of change they wanted by working within that system, and had then tried to affect change from the outside.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think you're right, like how I guess I think of it as part of the overall prison abolition movement, which is the idea of prison abolition, like any kind of abolition, is to be able to picture a world in which the thing you don't want exists, and try to work towards building that world. Does that mean that there will never be crime, or maybe people who have to be separated from society in some way? Most likely not, but it doesn't need to, like the way we're doing it doesn't need to look the way we're doing it, right? So I think it is part of like envisioning the system, but then also making things better with what we have. But you're right, there's a really difficult tension between perpetuating and like the sort of the idea of like designing a humane prison is to a lot of people an oxymoron, right? Yeah, is there a question?
There's a question in the chat asking if there are any social workers that work in private practice for those impacted by a prison experience in the Erie County area.
I have no idea. Does anyone else know the answer to that?
I know of 2 private practice social workers that do deal with people who have come out of incarceration.
Okay, so Kat, if you want to, we could put that in the chat if you know their names or anything you want to share that, or else we could try to cook them all that information.
I'll check.
Okay, yeah, so we maybe have an answer on that for the person in the chat. Also, I'm putting my contact information up here in case anybody wants to know me later.
There's another comment. I work in the criminal justice system, and I can at least more positively impact the clients I interact with on a daily basis. It may not change the system, but it is something.
Yeah, yeah.
Dean Alfred also has his hand raised.
All right, Dean Alfred, you can speak or just type.
Hi, yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, great. I was typing my comment question. I'm not sure if it's both. It probably is both, actually. I was typing it in the chat, but since I have the floor. Nicole, wonderful presentation, although it was very sobering in many ways, as we've already expressed. I think about the last video where this Black man who was wrongly convicted had to be in solitary confinement for decades. And I just wonder how many more, men of color also face this horrible sentence. I do recall one of your other slides offering the Mbute African proverb, I am because we are, and because we are, therefore I am, or at least a portion of that. And I'm just wondering if you know which slide that was, and it went by very quickly, so I wasn't sure if I caught the full significance, and maybe you could talk about that briefly.
I don't know a lot about Mbute, so I didn't even use the term in there. I think I kind of amended the quote. But you're right. That is what Desmond Tutu is talking about, where he says, "I am a person through other persons." Let me see if I can go back and find it.
It's an African proverb that I use a lot, and it's also one that speaks to our connectivity, or interconnectivity, should I say, interconnectedness, maybe is a better way of saying that, vis-a-vis humanity. So the last part of it is I am because other people are, yeah. So to me, that emanates from the full proverb of I am because we are, and because we are, therefore I am. We can't exist without each other, while at the same time, we also have to be in support and in uplift, if you will, of each other. And so, this has, I guess, a number of points of consideration when you think about the real meaning, and particularly in reference to the subject matter. Anyway, my comment, my question, delivered. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. And in a couple of his books, Desmond Tutu does talk specifically about solitary confinement, which, as you know, Nelson Mandela also experienced, right? So he talks about how it's so principled.
Tutu called Brian Stevenson the Nelson Mandela of the United States. He refers to Brian Stevenson in that way once, yeah.
I'll add one more quick comment, and I know we need to wrap up soon. But those of you that have been around this school as long as I have may remember Paul Gray, who taught here as an adjunct, somebody who had done really hard time in prison and got out, got his MSW here. Went back to work at Gowanda Correctional Facility, and then taught here as an adjunct for quite a number of years. So he definitely saw the value of social work inside the prison, even as a prisoner. That was something that was really important to him. So he sought his education here. I remember he had a really, really hard time getting a social work license in New York State as a convicted felon. And his argument when he had to go before the licensing board was, we as social workers believe that people can change. And so the licensing board needs to believe that I too can change and I have something to give back. And that was very, very powerful. So for those of you that may remember Paul Gray, or those of you that were just introduced to him, he was one of our adjuncts here for many years.
You've been here a long time. Hillary.
I've been here since '93, and I think he may have already been adjunct at that point.
Yeah, because I didn't know him at all.
Any other comments in the chat that I missed or anything, Michelle?
I think I got, I shared all of the comments that were in the chat. Except Dean Alford expresses thank you.
Is the place where you do the gardening, is that a field placement?
It was my field placement. My
Oh, it
second
was
year,
your
but
field
that's how I
placement.
ended up being part of the therapeutic gardening initiative.
Oh, okay. And is the Western New York Alternatives to Solitary, is that a field placement for us?
It's
do you know?
not. We're really small. I guess
Oh.
I could supervise it. But I hadn't really thought about it. Yeah, but that is how I got hooked up with Grassroots Gardens. So I am a community gardener through them anyway.
Right.
When I heard about the Solitary Gardens project, my friend sent it to me, and I was like, I feel like this jumped from my brain and heart, and it's amazing that someone is doing work around these two
Yeah.
things that I'm passionate about. And I've reached out to Jackie Sinnell too, and she's a really interesting person continuing to do a lot of work around this. Our most recent thing is something called the Prisoner Apothecary Project, so using other kinds of healing and sending things from prison.
I think Peter was answering a question, yes to the field placement, no to the latter.
Oh, okay.
Any other questions?
That's great appreciation. This
Yeah,
was
this is
really,
great.
really wonderful.
Oh, good.
I'm gonna be knocking on your door to come speak to my students.
I will happily speak to your students. I get a lot of these solutions. This was fun, so I could just create out of it whatever I want.
Lots of appreciation in the chat as well.
Well, thank you everybody for joining. If you want to reach out to me, feel free to do so.